My worst backpacking trip ever. First, I'd like to thank my friend Tim Buckley for calling me out to talk about my worst backpacking trip ever. If you like backpacking, you should definitely check out his channel, Backpacking with Buckley. He's awesome and clearly a beast because he hammock camps well below freezing. Someday, I'll be more like Buckley. Now, this was difficult because I've never actually been on a bad backpacking trip. I don't want to jinx it, but so far they've all gone pretty well. Buckley said it best when he said that even a bad day backpacking is much better than a good day in the office. I have to agree. So the trip I'll talk about, I honestly wouldn't even call it a bad backpacking trip, but there were a lot of funny things that happened, mostly because I was pretty inexperienced and unprepared. It was still an awesome trip. I'm glad I went on it, but this is the one I want to share. And it's way back in 2008 with some pretty good photos, so get excited for those. This was a trip I took with my father-in-law Jerry, and as I already said, I really enjoyed it. Hey Jerry, I'm pretty sure you're gonna see this, so just know this has nothing to do with the company and just all the funny things that happened. I'm thinking you'll be laughing right along with me, looking at these pictures and remembering this trip from over 13 years ago. For this trip, we went into the Uinta Mountains of Utah. We went to a place called Duck Lake, and things went pretty well with the hike in. One thing I really like about backpacking with my father-in-law is he does not mess around for dinner on the first night. It's typically steak, mashed potatoes, and chocolate pudding. Awesome. We had gotten camp set up. Jerry had just pulled the steaks off the fire. I was super hungry and really excited for some tasty dinner. I started cutting into my first piece, flipped my plate, and my steak, bam, right in the dirt. Crap. I froze because I didn't know what to do. We had just hauled this steak up several miles and it was my dinner. So I did what any good backpacker would do. I picked it up, brushed it off, blew it off, and then ate it. And it was the most delicious steak I think I've ever had. After polishing off my steak, my mashed potatoes, and my gravy, again, one of the best backpacking meals I've ever had, despite the slight grittiness. I threw my plate into the fire, forgetting that dessert was coming up. When I realized I was supposed to save that plate for chocolate pudding, I realized I had two options: either eat it out of my hands or use the box from the chocolate pudding, including a flap from that box as my spoon, to eat my dessert. Photographic evidence of my stupidity. Another thing I really remember from this trip is I wore a lot of cotton. I think everything I wore was cotton. If that's what you wear, fine. I've learned a lot about the right fabrics to wear since then. I was still wet from getting sweaty on the hike in, and I was cold that night because cotton doesn't dry. I also didn't know anything about R value or pad thickness or anything else. I just brought whatever pad I had laying in my garage, and I was really cold. I remember just outside of our tent, even though it was July, there was still a significant amount of snow on the ground. So that tells you it was still getting fairly cold at night. I was cold. Another thing I remember, this was also the last backpacking trip that I ever took my fishing pole on. I never catch fish. I don't even know why I have a fishing pole. In fact, thinking about it, I don't even know where it is right now, and that's for the best, because no matter where I take it, no matter who helps me, what bait I have, I never catch anything. I still enjoyed sitting by those high mountain lakes, fishing next to my father-in-law, but I didn't catch anything, and I brought all of that up for nothing. I don't do that anymore. If I remember right, we were up there for 2 nights, 3 days, and it was on that middle day that we trudged through the wilderness for what seemed like hours looking for a lake called, get this, Lost Lake. Now, I'm sure my father-in-law knew where we were going, at least generally all of the time. But not having my own map, not having really any navigational skills at that time, and this being my first backpacking trip alone with my father-in-law only 1 year after I'd married his daughter, I didn't really want to question his judgment, and I didn't have enough confidence to know where we were going, so I basically felt like we were lost all day. I still remember feeling totally nervous that we were never going to find our camp again, which, as I think about it now, is pretty silly. Of course we were going to find it. He knew where we were going. I just had no idea. So since then, I've taken that as a lesson as for me to know the area where I'm camping, even if I feel like I can rely on somebody else. I still need to know where I'm going, even if it's just for my own sanity. My wife says it's because I'm a control freak. Now this next one might be TMI, but here we go. I had heard that If your legs get tired of squatting while you're trying to do the business, sitting on a nice clean log can help. So I found what I thought was a nice clean log. Did the business, didn't think anything of it, but a few hours later realized I had made a grave mistake. As I laid in bed that night, I could feel there were several very itchy bumps on my hindquarters. I was certainly not going to ask my father-in-law to check them out, and I had no idea what they were, so I was a little worried about what had bit me in the butt while I was taking a poop on a log. Thankfully, they went away eventually, but I was pretty uncomfortable. Also, look at these shoes. I didn't know the first thing about hiking or backpacking footwear. All I knew was that I was cheap, so I went to Big 5 Sporting Goods and spent probably $10, maybe $15 on these amazing hiking boots. My feet were sore and they just really didn't work well. Apparently, I was also still figuring out that you shouldn't force your head backwards when you're taking a selfie. Look at this guy. But enough of that. As I said, this was still a great trip. Here are some things I love about that trip. It was only my second backpacking trip since I'd been in Scouts as a kid. And these first two trips are really what got me back into backpacking, which I clearly love now. It's a big part of my life and a big thing that keeps me sane. I love backpacking. Also, as I said, it's the first trip that my father-in-law took together, and we've had several fun trips tromping through the Uintas together, including my daughter Chloe's very first backpacking trip where it was just the three of us. This was also the first trip that I'd taken a hammock. Now I take a hammock on every single backpacking trip because they are so comfortable. So despite a super gritty steak, eating chocolate pudding with a cardboard box, wearing nothing but cotton, freezing at night, not catching any fish, feeling like I was lost for basically an entire day, looking for Lost Lake, this was an amazing trip. Any of you that have a worst backpacking trip ever, or just some funny stories about things that happened to you on your backpacking trips, let me know in the comments. Let me feel a little bit better. If it has something to do with your cheeks, you don't have to share that. Maybe just laugh as you remember it. Thanks again to Buckley for asking me to do this. It was really fun to dig through old pictures from 2008. Hopefully you got a laugh out of them as well. And again, definitely check out his channel, Backpacking with Buckley. I'll put a link to it below. Remember, life is better with some dirt in it.